She married him to save her family, but the man who paid her debts wasn't her husband. When Lady Amelia discovered the truth, she faced an impossible choice: destroy the Duke she had come to love, or sacrifice her own family to ruin. Subscribe now, because what happened in that Scottish castle will break your heart. Cold rain lashed against the ancient stones of Ravenswood Castle as her carriage climbed the mountain path through swirling mist. The journey north had taken 3 days, each mile carrying Lady Amelia Ashford further from everything she had ever known. Now, as her carriage struggled up the narrow mountain road toward Ravenswood Castle, she pressed her gloved hand against the rain-streaked window and watched the Scottish Highlands unfold in shades of grey and green. Mist clung to the valleys like shrouds, and the ancient peaks rose around her like silent witnesses to a transaction she could barely comprehend. She was going to marry a stranger. The thought settled in her chest with the weight of inevitability. 3 weeks ago, her father had called her into his study, that cramped, book-lined room that smelled of pipe tobacco and desperation. His hands had trembled as he'd shown her the letters, the final notices, the documents that spelled out their complete and utter ruin. The Ashford estate was gone. The townhouse in London would be seized within a fortnight. Her younger sister Margaret's modest dowry had already been spent trying to stave off creditors. They had nothing left, nothing except Amelia herself. "The Duke of Ravenswood has made an offer," her father had said, unable to meet her eyes. "He requires a wife. He's willing to settle all our debts in exchange for your hand in marriage." Amelia had known in that moment that she had no choice. Margaret was only 17, too young to be sacrificed to such an arrangement. Their mother had been dead for 5 years. There was no one else. The responsibility fell to her as clearly as if it had been written in the marriage contract itself. "I'll do it," she'd said quietly. Her father had wept. Now 3 weeks later, she was less than an hour from meeting her future husband for the first time. She knew almost nothing about him. Edmund Blackthorne, Duke of Ravenswood, 32 years old, owner of vast properties across Scotland and northern England, and, according to whispered rumours she'd overheard in London, a recluse who rarely left his ancestral castle in the Highlands. Turned cold after his first wife died, one society matron had murmured behind her fan. "Tragic business, that. They say he never recovered." Another had added with relish, "I heard she threw herself from the castle walls. Couldn't bear being married to such a severe man, isolated in that fortress with no society, no company." Amelia had stopped listening after that. Speculation and gossip wouldn't change her circumstances. She would marry the Duke of Ravenswood, save her family from destitution, and somehow find a way to endure whatever life awaited her in that remote castle. The carriage lurched over a particularly rough section of road, and Amelia's lady's maid, Sarah, let out a small gasp of alarm. The young woman had been Amelia's companion since childhood, and she'd insisted on accompanying her mistress north, despite the uncertainty of what awaited them. "I can see it, my lady," Sarah said, peering through the opposite window. "The castle." Amelia turned to look. Ravenswood Castle rose from the mountainside like something from a Gothic tale. Built of dark grey stone that seemed to absorb the dim afternoon light, it sprawled across a promontory, overlooking a deep glen. Towers crowned with crenellations pierced the low-hanging clouds. Narrow windows stared down at the approaching road like suspicious eyes. A curtain wall surrounded the main keep, and Amelia could make out the shapes of outbuildings within, stables perhaps, and servants' quarters. It looked impregnable, eternal, and utterly, completely isolated. "It's very grand," Sarah said carefully. "It's a fortress," Amelia replied. "I suppose that tells us something about the man who lives there." The carriage passed through an iron gate that stood open, its hinges shrieking in protest against the wind. The road curved through a sparse garden where a few hardy roses still bloomed despite the harsh climate. Then they were in the courtyard, and the castle walls rose up on 3 sides, blocking out what little light remained in the grey afternoon. The carriage rolled to a stop. Amelia took a deep breath, straightened her travelling cloak, and waited. Protocol dictated that someone from the household would come out to greet her. She was, after all, the future Duchess, even if she'd been purchased like a bolt of expensive silk to cover her father's shameful debts. The castle's main door opened and a tall woman in severe black dress emerged, followed by 2 footmen. The woman had iron-grey hair pulled back in a tight bun, and her face bore the stern expression of someone who had seen much and been impressed by little. One of the footmen opened the carriage door and lowered the step. Amelia accepted his hand and descended into the courtyard. Rain immediately began to soak through her cloak. "Lady Amelia Ashford," the woman in black said, her Scottish accent clipping the words precisely. "Yes," Amelia replied, lifting her chin slightly. She would not cower, no matter how intimidating this place seemed. "I am Mrs. MacLeod, the housekeeper of Ravenswood Castle. His Grace the Duke has asked me to welcome you and show you to your chambers. You must be exhausted from your journey." "Thank you, Mrs. MacLeod. This is my maid, Sarah." The housekeeper's sharp eyes assessed Sarah in one quick glance. "She'll be shown to the servants' quarters. Come, the weather is worsening." Amelia followed Mrs. MacLeod through the heavy oak door and into Ravenswood Castle. The entrance hall was vast and cold, with a vaulted ceiling that disappeared into shadows high above. Torches burned in iron sconces along the stone walls, but they seemed to create more shadow than light. A grand staircase of dark wood swept upward to the floors above. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors lined the walls, Blackthorns through the centuries, all watching the newcomer with painted eyes. "His Grace is attending to estate business," Mrs. MacLeod said as she led Amelia toward the staircase. "He will join you for dinner at 8 o'clock. Until then, you are welcome to rest in your chambers." "I had hoped to meet him upon my arrival," Amelia said, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. Mrs. MacLeod paused on the stairs and turned to regard her with an expression that might have been sympathy. "His Grace is not comfortable with social pleasantries, Lady Amelia. He finds them unnecessary. You'll learn his ways soon enough." They climbed 3 flights of stairs, each corridor growing progressively darker and colder. Finally, Mrs. MacLeod stopped before a heavy wooden door bound with iron. "Your chambers," she said, pushing the door open. The room beyond was larger than Amelia had expected, though no warmer than the rest of the castle. A 4-poster bed dominated one wall, its dark green velvet hangings looking suitably medieval. A fireplace held a struggling fire that barely seemed to push back the chill. 2 windows looked out over the glen, where mist was now rising like something alive. "Your trunks will be brought up shortly," Mrs. MacLeod continued. "There's fresh water in the basin. Dinner will be served in the small dining room. I'll send a maid to show you the way at 7:45. Do you require anything else?" "Just one thing," Amelia said. "Is His Grace... is he well?" Mrs. MacLeod's expression became carefully neutral. "His Grace is as he always is, Lady Amelia. You'll form your own opinion soon enough." She moved toward the door, then paused. "A word of advice, if I may. Please, don't expect warmth from the Duke of Ravenswood. He's not a cruel man, but he's not a feeling one either. Not anymore. Whatever you've come here hoping for, companionship, affection, love, you'd best put those thoughts aside. This is a practical arrangement. His Grace has been quite clear about that." The words landed like stones in Amelia's stomach, but she kept her expression composed. "I understand. Thank you for your honesty, Mrs. MacLeod." The housekeeper nodded and left, closing the door with a heavy thud that echoed through the chamber. Amelia stood alone in the middle of the room, listening to the wind howl against the castle walls. She walked to the window and looked out at the wild landscape, mountains and mist and the dark waters of a loch far below. It was beautiful in a savage, untamed way. It was also the loneliest vista she'd ever seen. She thought of her sister Margaret, safe now in the small cottage their father had managed to retain. She thought of the relief in her father's eyes when she'd agreed to this marriage. She thought of all the reasons why she'd said yes to becoming the wife of a man she'd never met. "Practical arrangement," she whispered to her reflection in the rain-streaked glass. "Very well. I can be practical." But even as she said it, she felt the first tremor of fear. Not of the Duke himself. She'd face him soon enough and make her own assessment. No, what frightened her was the realization that she would live out her days in this cold fortress, married to a man who had made it clear he expected nothing from her but the fulfillment of a contract. She'd saved her family. But what had she done to herself? The hours until dinner passed in a blur of unpacking and nervous anticipation. Sarah arrived with the trunks and helped Amelia dress in the most suitable gown she owned, a deep burgundy silk that had been her mother's, altered to fit her smaller frame. It was elegant without being ostentatious, appropriate for a first meeting with her intended husband. "You look beautiful, my lady," Sarah said, fastening a simple pearl necklace around Amelia's throat. "I look terrified," Amelia replied, studying herself in the small mirror above the washstand. "That too," Sarah admitted, "but beautifully terrified." A knock at the door announced the arrival of a young maid who introduced herself as Betsy. She led Amelia down a different series of corridors, these slightly less forbidding than the others, with occasional carpets to muffle the sound of footsteps and a few more torches to push back the darkness. The small dining room proved to be a relative term at Ravenswood Castle. The chamber could have easily seated 20, though only one end of the long table had been set for 2. A fire roared in the massive hearth, and candles blazed in a silver candelabra at the center of the table. After the chill of her chambers, the warmth was almost overwhelming. "His Grace will be with you shortly, my lady," Betsy said, and then she was gone, leaving Amelia alone. She walked slowly around the room, studying the portraits that hung between the windows. More Blackthorns, generation after generation of proud, severe faces. She paused before one that showed a young woman in a white dress, her dark hair crowned with flowers. The woman's painted smile seemed sad, her eyes haunted, despite the artist's skill. "My first wife." Amelia spun around. The Duke of Ravenswood stood in the doorway. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his perfectly tailored black coat. His hair was dark, almost black, with a touch of silver at the temples, despite his relative youth. His face was angular and handsome in a harsh way, with strong cheekbones and a firm jaw. But it was his eyes that held Amelia's attention. They were grey like the Scottish mist, and completely, utterly unreadable. "Your Grace," Amelia said, dropping into a curtsy. "Lady Amelia." His voice was deep, with a pronounced Scottish accent that softened the formality of his words. He moved into the room with the grace of a man comfortable in his own domain. "I trust your journey was bearable. It was long, but yes, bearable." He gestured to the table. "Please sit. I'm sure you're hungry." They took their seats at opposite ends of the small section that had been prepared. A servant appeared immediately to pour wine, a deep red that gleamed in the candlelight. Another brought the first course, a rich soup that steamed in porcelain bowls. Edmund Blackthorne watched her with those inscrutable grey eyes as she took her first spoonful. Amelia forced herself to meet his gaze steadily, though her heart was racing. "You're younger than I expected," he said finally. "I'm 23, Your Grace. I was told you were aware of my age. I was. But knowing something and seeing it are different things." He set down his spoon, the soup apparently of no interest to him. "I want to be clear about the nature of this arrangement, Lady Amelia. I'm sure your father explained the financial aspects. I settled his debts in full. In exchange, you will become my wife and eventually my Duchess. I understand. I doubt you understand all of it," he said, not unkindly. "But you will. This marriage is one of convenience and necessity. I require an heir to secure the Blackthorne line. You required salvation from financial ruin. Those are the terms. I will not pretend affection I do not feel, and I ask the same honesty from you." The bluntness of his words should have offended her, but Amelia found herself almost relieved by his directness. At least there would be no false promises, no pretense of romance where none existed. "I appreciate your frankness, Your Grace," she said. "I entered into this arrangement with my eyes open. I won't burden you with expectations of sentiment." Something flickered in his grey eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or approval. "Good. Then we understand each other." He reached for his wineglass. "The wedding will take place in 3 days. I've arranged for a minister from the village. It will be a simple ceremony in the castle chapel with only essential witnesses present." 3 days? Amelia's hand tightened on her spoon. She'd known it would be soon, but 3 days gave her almost no time to prepare herself mentally for the reality of becoming this man's wife. "Is that a problem?" "No, Your Grace. 3 days is acceptable." He nodded, seemingly satisfied. "You'll find Ravenswood very different from London society, Lady Amelia. We rarely entertain guests. I have business that requires my attention most days. You'll have the freedom of the castle and grounds, but I would advise against wandering too far into the Highlands alone. The landscape can be treacherous for those unfamiliar with it. I'll be careful." The servants brought the next course, roasted game hen with vegetables. Edmund ate methodically, without particular enjoyment. Amelia picked at her own food, her appetite having completely vanished. "Mrs. MacLeod will instruct you in the household management," Edmund continued. "Though she's been running things quite efficiently for years, you need only involve yourself as much or as little as you choose." "I'd like to be useful," Amelia said. "I'm not accustomed to idleness. Suit yourself." He drained his wineglass and signaled for more. "Was there anything else you wished to know about your new home?" There were 1,000 questions Amelia wanted to ask, but looking at the closed expression on Edmund Blackthorne's face, she suspected few of them would be answered tonight. Still, one question pressed too heavily on her mind to ignore. "Your first wife," she said quietly. "The portrait in here, she was very beautiful. I'm sorry for your loss." Edmund's entire body went rigid. The hand reaching for his wineglass froze mid-motion. For a long moment he said nothing, and Amelia wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake mentioning the subject. When he finally spoke, his voice was colder than the Highland wind. "We will not discuss my first wife, Lady Amelia. Not tonight. Not ever. That part of my life is closed, and it will remain closed. Do I make myself clear?" "Perfectly clear, Your Grace." He pushed back from the table abruptly. "I have work to attend to. I'll bid you good night. Mrs. MacLeod will see to any needs you may have." And with that, he strode from the dining room, leaving Amelia alone with half-eaten food and a growing sense of dread. She sat in the candlelight for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. The Duke of Ravenswood was everything she'd feared, and nothing she'd expected. Cold, yes. Distant, certainly. But there had been something beneath that icy exterior when she'd mentioned his first wife. A flash of genuine pain so acute it had transformed his face for just an instant. Whatever had happened to the first Duchess of Ravenswood, it had wounded Edmund Blackthorne in ways that still bled years later. "My lady." Betsy appeared in the doorway. "Would you like me to show you back to your chambers?" "Yes, please." The journey back through the dark corridors felt even more lonely than before. When Amelia reached her room, she found that Sarah had turned down the bed and laid out her nightgown. A fire burned more robustly in the hearth, pushing back some of the chill. "How was dinner, my lady?" Sarah asked, helping Amelia out of the burgundy gown. "Illuminating," Amelia replied, though perhaps not in the way I'd hoped. She dismissed Sarah for the night and prepared for bed herself, moving through the familiar rituals with automatic precision. But when she finally climbed between the cold linen sheets and stared up at the dark canopy above her, sleep refused to come. The wind howled around the castle towers like a living thing. Somewhere in the distance she thought she heard a door slam. The ancient stones creaked and settled, and in her mind she kept seeing Edmund Blackthorne's face when she'd mentioned his first wife, that momentary crack in his armour that had revealed something raw and wounded beneath. She'd come to Ravenswood to fulfill a contract, to save her family through a marriage of convenience. She'd expected coldness, formality, perhaps even cruelty. What she hadn't expected was to find herself wondering about the man behind those grey eyes, wondering what had hurt him so badly that he'd locked himself away in this remote fortress, wondering if the portrait of his first wife held the answer to the mystery of Edmund Blackthorne. 3 days until the wedding. 3 days to prepare herself for a life bound to a man who had made it abundantly clear he wanted nothing from her but duty and discretion. Amelia pulled the blankets tighter around herself and listened to the wind. Somewhere in this vast, cold castle, Edmund Blackthorne was likely working in his study, immersed in estate business, purposefully avoiding any thought of the woman who would soon become his second wife. She told herself she didn't care. She told herself this was exactly the arrangement she'd agreed to. She told herself that his coldness was actually a blessing. It would make it easier to maintain her own emotional distance. But as she finally drifted into uneasy sleep, Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just committed herself to something far more complicated than a simple marriage of convenience. She'd committed herself to a mystery, and mysteries, she'd learned from her father's library of Gothic novels, rarely ended well for the curious. The castle seemed to whisper agreement as the Highland mist rolled in through the glen, wrapping Ravenswood in its cold, concealing embrace. The morning after her arrival, Amelia woke to find pale sunlight struggling through the thick mist that clung to Ravenswood Castle. Sarah had already been in to stoke the fire, and a breakfast tray sat waiting on the small table near the window. Steam rose from a pot of tea, and the smell of fresh bread briefly made the chamber feel less like a prison. Amelia, dressed in a simple day gown of deep green wool, practical for exploring a draughty castle, and sat down to her solitary breakfast. Through the window she could see the mountains emerging from their shroud of fog, their peaks still touched with last winter's snow, despite the approach of autumn. It was breathtakingly beautiful and utterly isolating. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Mrs. MacLeod entered, her severe black dress as crisp as it had been the evening before. "Good morning, Lady Amelia. I trust you slept well." "Well enough, thank you. His Grace has asked me to give you a tour of the castle and explain the household routines. If you're amenable, we can begin after you've finished your breakfast." Amelia set down her teacup. "I'm ready now. I've eaten quite enough." Mrs. MacLeod's expression softened almost imperceptibly, the first hint of warmth Amelia had seen from the woman. "Very well. Bring a shawl. The corridors can be cold." For the next 2 hours, Mrs. MacLeod led Amelia through the labyrinthine halls of Ravenswood Castle. The fortress was far larger than it had appeared from the outside, with wings that sprawled across the mountainside and cellars that descended deep into the rock itself. "The original keep dates back to the 13th century, Mrs. MacLeod explained, as they walked through a gallery lined with more ancestral portraits. "Each generation of Blackthorns has added to it. The east wing was built in the 1600s, the west wing just 50 years ago by the current Duke's grandfather." "It's magnificent," Amelia said, and she meant it. Despite the cold and the gloom, there was a stark grandeur to Ravenswood that appealed to something deep within her. They passed through drawing rooms filled with furniture shrouded in holland covers, a music room with a pianoforte that looked as though it hadn't been played in years, and a library that made Amelia's breath catch. Floor-to-ceiling shelves held thousands of volumes, their leather spines gleaming in the dim light. "His Grace spends considerable time here," Mrs. MacLeod said, noting Amelia's interest. "You're welcome to borrow any books you wish. Does he read for pleasure or only for business?" "I couldn't say, my lady. The Duke is not one to discuss his private pursuits." Mrs. MacLeod moved toward a narrow staircase. "The family chapel is this way." They descended into the older part of the castle, where the walls were bare stone, and the air smelled of damp and age. The chapel was small, no more than 20 feet long, with wooden pews for perhaps 30 people. Stained glass windows depicted saints Amelia didn't recognize, Celtic crosses and ancient symbols that predated the Reformation. "The wedding will be here," Mrs. MacLeod said. "Friday morning at 10 o'clock. I've arranged for your dress to be pressed. His Grace has asked that you wear something simple." "Of course." Amelia ran her hand along one of the pews, feeling the centuries of prayers absorbed into the wood. "Mrs. MacLeod, may I ask you something?" The housekeeper's posture stiffened slightly. "You may ask." "His first wife. What happened to her?" The silence that followed was so complete that Amelia could hear her own heartbeat. Mrs. MacLeod's face became a mask, carefully blank. "That is not my story to tell, Lady Amelia. But there is a story. There is always a story in a place this old." Mrs. MacLeod moved toward the chapel door. "Come, there's more to see." They climbed back into the main levels of the castle, but Amelia noticed that Mrs. MacLeod carefully avoided one particular corridor that branched off to the left. When Amelia paused near its entrance, the housekeeper's voice sharpened. "Not that way, my lady." "Why not? What's down there?" "The Duke's private chambers and study. He's quite particular about his privacy." "I see." Amelia filed that information away. A man who locked himself behind closed doors had something to hide, or something to protect himself from. They ended the tour in the housekeeper's sitting room, a surprisingly cozy chamber with comfortable furniture and a fire that actually provided warmth. Mrs. MacLeod poured tea from a practical earthenware pot. "You seem like a sensible young woman," the housekeeper said, settling into her chair with a sigh. "So I'll speak plainly. Life at Ravenswood is quiet. We have few visitors. His Grace prefers it that way. The staff is small but loyal. We've all been here for many years. You'll find us willing to serve you, but we're set in our ways. I don't intend to disrupt the household, Amelia assured her. I'm glad to hear it. Mrs. MacLeod studied her over the rim of her teacup. May I ask why you agreed to this marriage? Forgive my bluntness, but you're young, well-bred, and pleasant to look at. Surely there were other options. Amelia considered lying, then decided against it. Mrs. MacLeod struck her as someone who would respect honesty more than pretty fabrications. My father's debts were extensive. This was the only way to save my family from complete ruin. The Duke made a generous offer, and I accepted it. So it's a business arrangement. Entirely. Mrs. MacLeod nodded slowly. Then you and His Grace are well matched. He views marriage the same way. A necessary transaction, nothing more. She set down her cup. But I'll tell you something, Lady Amelia. It wasn't always so. The Duke was different once before. She stopped abruptly. Before his first wife died? Before he learned that trust is a dangerous thing. Mrs. MacLeod rose, signaling the end of their conversation. You'll do well here if you remember that His Grace values privacy, routine, and discretion above all else. Don't push him to open doors he wishes to keep closed. The warning was clear, but it only intensified Amelia's curiosity. What doors? What secrets? That afternoon, Amelia decided to explore the castle grounds. She wrapped herself in a thick cloak and ventured out into the courtyard. The mist had lifted slightly, revealing a landscape of wild beauty. The castle gardens were small and practical. Herbs for the kitchen, a few hardy flowers. But beyond the walls, the Highlands stretched endlessly in every direction. She followed a path that led to the castle's curtain wall and climbed the stone steps to the battlements. From this vantage point she could see for miles. The glen below was a patchwork of heather and grass, crossed by a silver stream that eventually fed into the distant loch. No other houses were visible, no roads except the one that had brought her here. They truly were alone in this wilderness. Beautiful, isn't it? Amelia gasped and spun around. Edmund Blackthorne stood a few feet away, his dark coat whipping in the wind. She hadn't heard him approach. The man moved like a ghost in his own castle. Your Grace, I didn't expect— I often walk the battlements, he said, moving to stand beside her at the wall. It helps me think. Up close, in the grey afternoon light, Amelia could see the lines of fatigue around his eyes. He looked like a man who didn't sleep well. His hair was slightly dishevelled, as though he'd been running his hands through it. I hope I'm not intruding on your privacy, Amelia said. The castle is yours as much as mine now. Or it will be, in 2 days. He stared out at the mountains, his profile sharp against the sky. Mrs. MacLeod gave you the tour? Yes. Ravenswood is extraordinary. It's a fortress. That's what it was built to be, and that's what it remains. He paused, then added almost reluctantly, I'm glad you find it acceptable. Some would consider it a prison. I don't think that, Amelia said. It's isolated, yes, but there's a kind of peace in that isolation. London felt suffocating to me sometimes. All those people, all those expectations. Edmund turned to look at her directly for the first time. His grey eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her heart skip. You surprise me, Lady Amelia. How so? I expected complaints, tears perhaps, demands to return to civilization. Did your first wife complain? The question was out before Amelia could stop it. Edmund's expression immediately closed. The brief moment of connection shattered. I told you we would not discuss her. Forgive me. But Your Grace, I'm going to live in this castle. I'm going to walk these halls, sleep in these rooms. If there's something I should know, there's nothing you need to know except what I've already told you. His voice was ice. This is a marriage of convenience. I require an heir. You require financial security. Everything else is irrelevant. He turned to leave, but Amelia found herself speaking again, driven by a stubbornness she hadn't known she possessed. It's not irrelevant to me. I'm going to be your wife. I think I deserve to know what happened in this castle. What changed you from— She gestured helplessly. Mrs. MacLeod said you were different once. Edmund stopped. For a long moment he stood with his back to her, the wind tugging at his coat. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible above the wind. You want to know what happened? Very well. He turned to face her, and the pain in his eyes was so raw that Amelia instinctively took a step back. "I was fool enough to believe in love, Lady Amelia. I married a beautiful woman who swore she adored me. I gave her everything, my heart, my trust, my name, and I discovered too late that she'd never wanted me at all. She wanted my title and my fortune. When she realized she was trapped in this prison with a man she despised, she found comfort elsewhere." Amelia's hand flew to her mouth. "She was unfaithful, spectacularly so, with my own cousin, as it happens, Lord Victor Blackthorne, a charming scoundrel who's always coveted everything I have." Edmund's laugh was bitter. "They were quite clever about it. I didn't discover the truth until I found them together, in my own bedchamber." "Dear God," Amelia whispered. "I confronted her. She laughed, said I'd been blind and foolish, that she'd never loved me, that Victor was twice the man I'd ever be, that the only reason she'd married me was to secure her position, and now that she had my name and my protection, she'd do as she pleased." Edmund's hands clenched on the stone battlements. 3 days later she was dead, fell from these very walls during a storm. The horror of it settled over Amelia like a shroud. The rumours say she threw herself. The rumours say many things. That she jumped out of guilt, that I pushed her in rage, that Victor killed her to silence her. Edmund's voice was hollow. "The truth is that no one knows what happened that night. She went out in the storm alone. I was in my study. By the time the servants found her body on the rocks below, it was too late." "I'm so sorry," Amelia said, and she meant it. Whatever Edmund Blackthorne's faults, no one deserved such betrayal. "Don't be. It was 7 years ago. I've learned to live with it." He straightened his shoulders, composing himself. "But now you understand why I value honesty over sentiment, why I prefer a business arrangement to the pretense of affection. Love is a weapon, Lady Amelia. It's far safer to avoid it entirely." He walked past her toward the steps, but paused before descending. "I've told you this, so you'll understand the rules of our marriage. I will provide for you, protect you, treat you with respect, but I will never love you. And I strongly advise you not to make the mistake of loving me. That path leads only to disappointment." Then he was gone, his footsteps echoing on the stone stairs. Amelia remained on the battlements, the wind stinging her eyes. She looked down at the glen far below, imagining a woman falling through the darkness, her screams swallowed by the storm. What had really happened that night? Had Edmund's first wife jumped out of despair or guilt? Had it been an accident? Or had something more sinister occurred in the shadows of Ravenswood Castle? And Lord Victor Blackthorne? Where was he now? Edmund had mentioned him as though he were still alive, still a presence somehow. Amelia wrapped her cloak tighter and headed back toward the castle. 2 days until the wedding. 2 days until she bound herself legally and spiritually to a man whose first marriage had ended in tragedy and suspicion. She should be terrified. And perhaps she was, a little. But more than fear, she felt a growing determination to understand the truth of this place and the wounded man who ruled it. Because Mrs. MacLeod had been right. There was always a story in a place this old. And Amelia suspected the story of Ravenswood Castle was far from over. That evening dinner was a solitary affair. A note from Edmund informed her that he was dining in his study and wished not to be disturbed. Amelia ate alone in the small dining room, studying the portrait of the first Duchess that hung on the wall. The woman had been beautiful, certainly. Dark hair, delicate features, a knowing smile that now seemed sinister in light of what Amelia had learned. Had she been happy when that portrait was painted? Or had she already been planning her betrayal? She was a right beauty, wasn't she? Amelia turned to find Betsy, the young maid, refilling her wine-glass. "Did you know her?" Amelia asked. Betsy's eyes widened. "Oh no, my lady. I only came to Ravenswood 5 years ago, but the older servants they remember. Mrs. MacLeod could tell you stories, though she won't, out of loyalty to his grace." "What do the other servants say?" Betsy glanced toward the door, checking for eavesdroppers. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "They say the castle's been different since she died. Colder. They say her spirit still walks the corridors at night, weeping for what she lost. They say—" She stopped abruptly, her face flushing. "Please, Betsy. I'm going to live here. If there's something I should know, They say Lord Victor still comes around sometimes, not to the castle, mind you. His Grace won't allow that. But he has a hunting lodge about 10 miles north. Some of the servants have seen him in the village asking questions about His Grace, about the estate. Betsy lowered her voice even further. They say he's waiting for something, that he thinks Ravenswood should have been his. A chill ran down Amelia's spine. Why would he think that? Lord Victor is the Duke's cousin, second in line to the title. If His Grace dies without an heir? Betsy trailed off, the implication clear. But His Grace is young and healthy. Surely Lord Victor wouldn't— I'm just telling you what's whispered, my lady. Pay it no mind. Servants' gossip, nothing more. But Betsy's nervous expression suggested she believed more than she was saying. After dinner, Amelia returned to her chambers to find Sarah waiting with her nightgown prepared. "You look troubled, my lady," Sarah said as she helped Amelia undress. "I've learned some disturbing things about this place. About the first Duchess?" Amelia nodded. She betrayed His Grace terribly, with his own cousin no less, and then she died under mysterious circumstances. Sarah's hand stilled on the buttons of Amelia's dress. "Do you think he killed her?" "I don't know what to think." Amelia moved to the window, staring out at the darkness. "He seems genuinely wounded by what she did, but there's such coldness in him now, such control. What if that control slips? Then you come fetch me and we leave this place immediately," Sarah said firmly. "Money or no money, I won't let you stay somewhere dangerous." Amelia smiled at her maid's fierce loyalty. "Thank you, Sarah, but I don't think I'm in physical danger. It's my heart I'm worried about." "Your heart, my lady?" "Never mind, just the musings of an overtired mind." Amelia climbed into bed and let Sarah tuck the covers around her. "Get some rest. Tomorrow I need to prepare for the wedding." After Sarah left, Amelia lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the castle settling around her. Footsteps echoed in distant corridors. Wind rattled the windows, and somewhere, far away, she thought she heard a woman's voice, soft, plaintive, weeping. She told herself it was just the wind playing tricks on her imagination, told herself that ghosts didn't exist, that Betsy's talk of spirits was nothing more than superstitious nonsense. But as she finally drifted into sleep, Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that Ravenswood Castle held secrets that refused to stay buried, and in 2 days she would bind herself to this place and its mysteries forever. The last thought she had before sleep claimed her was of Edmund Blackthorne's grey eyes, and the terrible pain she'd seen in them when he spoke of trust and betrayal. He'd told her not to love him, warned her explicitly that such feelings would lead only to disappointment. Amelia vowed to heed that warning. She would be a dutiful wife, a practical partner in their arrangement, nothing more. But even as she made that vow, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that it might already be too late, that somewhere between the battlements and the dining room, between his stark honesty and his terrible wounds, she'd begun to feel something dangerously close to compassion for the Duke of Ravenswood. And compassion, she feared, was only the first step towards something far more dangerous. Outside, the Highland mist rolled in thick and heavy, wrapping Ravenswood Castle in its cold embrace. And in his study in the forbidden corridor, Edmund Blackthorne sat alone in the darkness, staring at a letter he'd received that afternoon, a letter bearing the seal of Lord Victor Blackthorne. The past, it seemed, refused to stay dead. The morning of the wedding arrived with unexpected sunshine breaking through the perpetual mist. Amelia woke early, her stomach churning with nervousness. In a few hours, she would become the Duchess of Ravenswood, bound for life to a man she barely knew, in a castle haunted by the ghost of his first marriage. Sarah bustled about the chamber, preparing Amelia's wedding dress. It was simple, as Edmund had requested, ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and sleeves, elegant without being ostentatious. Amelia's mother had worn it at her own wedding 25 years ago. "You'll be beautiful, my lady," Sarah said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Don't cry," Amelia said, though her own emotions were precariously close to the surface. "This is what needs to happen, I know. But I wish—" Sarah trailed off, then forced a smile. "Never mind my foolish thoughts. Let's make you ready." The preparation took nearly 2 hours. Sarah dressed Amelia's dark hair in an elegant arrangement, woven through with small white flowers, that Mrs. MacLeod had somehow procured. The dress fit perfectly, hugging Amelia's slender frame before flowing to the floor in graceful folds. A simple veil of antique lace completed the ensemble. When Amelia finally looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked like a duchess, poised, elegant, every inch the aristocrat, but her eyes betrayed her anxiety. "It's time, my lady," Mrs. MacLeod announced from the doorway. The housekeeper's severe expression had softened slightly. "You look lovely." "Thank you." Amelia took a deep breath. "I'm ready." The walk to the chapel felt both endless and far too short. Her footsteps echoed through the stone corridors, each one carrying her closer to an irrevocable commitment. When they reached the chapel doors, Mrs. MacLeod paused. "His Grace is already inside, along with the minister and witnesses. When you're ready, the doors will open." Amelia nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. The doors swung open. The small chapel had been transformed. Candles blazed everywhere, their golden light softening the ancient stone. Flowers, roses and heather, lined the aisle and decorated the simple altar. And at the front, standing rigidly in a black suit, was Edmund Blackthorne. He turned as she entered, and for a moment their eyes met. Something flickered across his face, surprise perhaps or appreciation, before his expression returned to its usual careful neutrality. Amelia walked down the aisle alone. There was no father to give her away, no family to witness this moment. Just Mrs. MacLeod, Sarah, the butler Morrison, and a few other senior servants standing as witnesses to the transaction that would bind her to this remote castle forever. When she reached Edmund's side, he offered his hand. His fingers were warm and steady as they closed around hers. The minister began the ceremony. Amelia heard the words as if from a great distance, the traditional vows, the promises of loyalty and honor, the binding of two lives into one. When it came time to speak, her voice emerged clear and calm, despite the turmoil in her heart. "I, Amelia Margaret Ashford, take thee, Edmund Alexander Blackthorne." Edmund's responses were equally steady, his deep voice filling the chapel with quiet authority. "I, Edmund Alexander Blackthorne, take thee, Amelia Margaret Ashford." The minister blessed their union. Edmund slipped a gold ring onto Amelia's finger. It was slightly too large, clearly sized for a different hand. His first wife's ring, she realized with a jolt. He'd given her a dead woman's wedding band. "You may kiss your bride," the minister announced. Edmund hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in the briefest, most chaste of kisses. His mouth was warm, his breath carrying the scent of coffee. Then he pulled back and it was done. She was the Duchess of Ravenswood. The wedding breakfast was held in the small dining room. Mrs. MacLeod had prepared an impressive spread, despite the short notice: fresh bread, eggs, smoked fish, pastries, and strong tea. Edmund ate mechanically, saying little. The witnesses offered polite congratulations and then excused themselves, leaving the newlyweds alone. That went well, Amelia ventured, breaking the uncomfortable silence. As well as could be expected. Edmund set down his fork. "I have business to attend to this afternoon. Estate matters that can't be delayed. I trust you can occupy yourself?" So this was how it would be. Married in the morning, abandoned by afternoon. "Of course, Your Grace, you may call me Edmund. We're married now." "Edmund, then." The name felt strange on her tongue. "And you should call me Amelia." He nodded, already rising from the table. "I'll see you at dinner." And then he was gone, leaving Amelia alone on her wedding day. She sat in the empty dining room, staring at the gold band on her finger. It gleamed dully in the candlelight, a symbol of a union that felt more like a business contract than a marriage. She twisted it absently, wondering whose finger it had graced before hers, wondering if Edmund's first wife had sat in this same room, on her own wedding day, full of hope and anticipation. That woman's story had ended on the rocks below the castle walls. Amelia could only pray that her own story would have a different conclusion. The next 3 weeks passed in a strange sort of limbo. Amelia settled into the rhythms of Ravenswood Castle, learning its moods and secrets, as one might learn a new language. She discovered that the library's east corner received the best light in the mornings, that the music room's pianoforte was badly out of tune but still playable, that the servants' gossip was most revealing when she pretended not to be listening. Edmund remained distant and preoccupied. They shared dinners most evenings, stilted formal affairs where conversation rarely ventured beyond estate business or neutral topics like the weather. He'd shown her basic courtesy, but nothing more. Their marriage remained unconsummated, a fact that hung between them like an unspoken question. But Amelia began to notice small things. The way Edmund's eyes followed her when he thought she wasn't looking. The way his expression softened almost imperceptibly when she made an astute observation about castle management. The way his hand had lingered on hers, just for a moment, when passing her the salt at dinner. He was not as immune to her presence as he pretended, and she, despite her best intentions, found herself watching him as well, noticing the way candlelight caught in his dark hair, the strength in his hands as he handled books or correspondence, the rare moments when something amused him and the corners of his mouth would quirk upward in an almost smile. It was dangerous territory, and Amelia knew it, but loneliness made people reckless. Everything changed on a Thursday afternoon in early October. Amelia had been exploring the less frequented parts of the castle when she discovered a tower room she hadn't seen before. It was accessed by a narrow, spiral staircase and contained what appeared to be an old solar, a private sitting room with windows on 3 sides, offering spectacular views of the Highlands. She was standing at one of the windows, lost in thought, when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Edmund appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath from the climb. He stopped short when he saw her. "I'm sorry," Amelia said quickly. "I didn't know this room was off limits. I was just exploring. It's not off limits." Edmund moved into the room slowly, as if the space held painful memories. "I just haven't been up here in years. This used to be my private refuge, before his first wife's betrayal, before he'd locked his heart away." "It's beautiful," Amelia said softly. "Peaceful." Edmund joined her at the window. They stood side by side, not touching, watching clouds roll across the distant peaks. "I came looking for you," Edmund said finally. "There's a storm coming. A bad one, according to Morrison. These Highland storms can be dangerous. I wanted to make sure you weren't wandering outside." Something warm bloomed in Amelia's chest at his concern. "Thank you. I'll stay inside." They fell into silence again, but it felt different from their usual careful politeness, more comfortable, almost companionable. "Amelia," Edmund said, and the sound of her name in his deep voice sent an unexpected shiver through her. "I want to apologize." "For what?" "For my coldness. For treating you more like a housekeeper than a wife." He kept his eyes on the horizon. "You've been nothing but gracious and understanding since you arrived. You deserve better than what I've given you." "You've been honest," Amelia said. "That's more than many husbands offer. Honesty without kindness is just cruelty by another name." He turned to face her, and the raw emotion in his grey eyes took her breath away. "I've been cruel to you, Amelia. Not intentionally, but the effect is the same. And I'm sorry." Before she could respond, the first drops of rain began to fall. Within seconds, it had become a deluge. Thunder cracked overhead like artillery fire. The wind howled around the tower, rattling the windows. "We should go back down," Edmund said, raising his voice over the storm. They started down the narrow spiral staircase, but in the dim light and driving rain, Amelia's foot slipped on the slick stone. She pitched forward with a cry of alarm. Edmund's arm shot out, catching her around the waist and pulling her back against his chest. They froze, pressed together in the narrow space. Amelia could feel his heart pounding against her back, could feel his breath warm against her neck. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough. "No, I'm fine." "Thank you." He should have released her, should have stepped back and put proper distance between them. But he didn't. His arm remained around her waist, and Amelia found she didn't want him to let go. "Amelia," he said again, her name barely audible above the storm. Another crack of thunder interrupted whatever he'd been about to say. The castle seemed to shake with it, and suddenly the lights went out. They were plunged into complete darkness. "The storm must have damaged something," Edmund said. "Stay close to me. I know these stairs well enough to navigate them blind." He kept one hand on her waist and the other on the stone wall as he guided them carefully down the spiral steps. Amelia's heart raced, from the near fall, from the darkness, from the feeling of Edmund's body so close to hers. When they finally reached the bottom, emergency lanterns were already being lit in the corridor. Mrs. MacLeod hurried toward them, her face tight with worry. "Your Grace, thank heavens we've lost power throughout the east wing. Morrison thinks a tree came down on the lines from the generator house." "How bad is the storm?" Edmund asked. "Worse than we've seen in years. The wind's already torn part of the stable roof loose. Morrison's got men trying to secure it before the horses panic." Edmund released Amelia reluctantly. "I need to help. Amelia, go to your chambers and stay there until—" "I'm coming with you," she said firmly. "This isn't— I grew up on an estate. I know how to handle frightened horses. You need all the help you can get." For a moment, she thought he'd argue. But then something shifted in his expression. Respect, perhaps, or simply acceptance, that she was more than a decorative wife to be tucked away in safety. "Very well. But stay close to me." They spent the next 3 hours battling the storm. Rain lashed them as they worked to calm the horses and secure the damaged roof. Lightning split the sky in brilliant, terrifying forks. The wind was so strong that Amelia had to grip Edmund's arm to keep from being blown over. But through it all they worked together, Edmund shouting instructions, Amelia carrying tools and supplies, both of them soaked to the skin and covered in mud, but refusing to give up until the horses were safe and the roof was secured as well as possible. When it was finally done, they stumbled back to the castle, exhausted. Mrs. MacLeod met them at the door with thick towels and concerned clucking. "Both of you need hot baths immediately before you catch your deaths. I'll have them prepared." Amelia was shivering so hard she could barely speak. Edmund's arm came around her shoulders, steadying her. "Can you make it to your chambers?" he asked. "I think so. I'll walk with you, just to be sure." They climbed the stairs together, still dripping water and leaving muddy footprints. When they reached Amelia's door, she turned to thank him and found herself trapped by the intensity of his gaze. "You were magnificent tonight," Edmund said softly, "brave and capable and remarkable. I just did what needed doing." "No, you did more than that." His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a streak of mud. "You reminded me of something I'd forgotten." "What's that?" "That strength isn't always found in isolation. Sometimes it comes from standing beside someone who refuses to let you face the storm alone." Before Amelia could process his words, Edmund leaned down and kissed her, not the chaste ceremonial kiss of their wedding, but something deeper and more genuine. His lips moved against hers with a tenderness that made her knees weak. His hand tangled in her wet hair, pulling her closer. Amelia kissed him back, all her resolve to maintain emotional distance crumbling like the castle walls in the storm. She'd been so careful, so determined not to feel anything for this wounded man. But in that moment, with rain still dripping from their clothes and thunder echoing through the halls, she felt everything. When Edmund finally pulled back, his eyes held confusion and something that might have been fear. "I shouldn't have done that," he said. "Why not? We're married." "Because—" He stopped, struggling for words. "Because I don't want to hurt you, Amelia. I don't want you to expect things from me that I can't give. I'm not asking you for anything," she said quietly. I'm here. That's all." He searched her face, as if trying to determine whether she was telling the truth. Then he stepped back, putting distance between them again. "Get warm. Get dry. We'll talk tomorrow." He disappeared down the corridor, leaving Amelia standing in her doorway with her lips still tingling and her heart racing. Sarah appeared moments later to help her out of her sodden clothes and into a steaming bath. As Amelia sank into the hot water, she tried to make sense of what had just happened. Edmund had kissed her, really kissed her, and for those few moments, she'd felt the walls he'd built around himself beginning to crumble, but she'd also seen the fear in his eyes, the terror of someone who'd been betrayed so deeply that the thought of trusting again was almost unbearable. "You're smiling, my lady," Sarah observed as she helped wash the mud from Amelia's hair. "Am I? Like you've discovered a secret." Perhaps she had. Perhaps she'd discovered that beneath Edmund Blackthorne's cold exterior was a man capable of warmth and tenderness, a man who'd been wounded but not broken, a man who might, just possibly, learn to trust again. It was a dangerous discovery, It made her want things she'd promised herself not to want. But as Amelia climbed into bed that night, clean and warm and replaying that kiss over and over in her mind, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. The storm raged on outside, but inside Ravenswood Castle, something else was beginning, something fragile and precious and terrifying. And in his own chambers, Edmund Blackthorne sat by his fire, staring into the flames and wondering what madness had possessed him to kiss his wife, to let her see past his carefully constructed defenses, to allow himself, even for a moment, to feel something other than the safe numbness he'd cultivated for 7 years. He told himself it had been the adrenaline of the storm, the relief of surviving danger, nothing more. But he couldn't forget the way Amelia had felt in his arms, the way she'd kissed him back without hesitation or calculation, the way she'd looked at him afterward, not with the greedy calculation of his first wife, but with something that looked dangerously like genuine affection. It terrified him, because Edmund Blackthorne had learned at great cost that affection could be feigned, that trust could be weaponized, that love was the most dangerous game of all. And yet, Amelia was different, wasn't she? He wanted desperately to believe it. But wanting and believing were two different things. The fire crackled and popped, the storm howled, and Edmund made a decision. Tomorrow he would pull back, rebuild the walls that had protected him for so long, because the alternative, opening his heart again only to have it shattered, was more than he could bear. But even as he made that decision, a small part of him whispered that it might already be too late. That somewhere between the tower room and the storm, between her bravery and her unexpected kiss, he'd begun to fall for his own wife, and that, more than any storm, was truly terrifying. The morning after the storm dawned cold and clear. Amelia woke with the memory of Edmund's kiss still burning on her lips and a cautious hope blooming in her chest. Perhaps last night had been a turning point. Perhaps the walls between them were finally beginning to crumble. She dressed carefully in a gown of deep blue wool, arranging her hair with more attention than usual. When she descended to breakfast, her heart was racing with anticipation. But Edmund wasn't there. "His Grace left before dawn, my lady," Mrs. MacLeod informed her. "He's gone to inspect the damage from the storm. Said he wouldn't be back until evening." The disappointment hit Amelia like a physical blow. She managed to keep her expression neutral as she took her seat. "I see. Thank you, Mrs. MacLeod." She spent the day trying to occupy herself, reading in the library, practicing at the pianoforte, walking the corridors. But her mind kept returning to Edmund's kiss, to the tenderness in his touch, to the fear in his eyes when he'd pulled away. He was running from her. She knew it, with absolute certainty. Dinner that evening was even more awkward than usual. Edmund arrived late, his manner distant and formal. He answered her attempts at conversation with monosyllables, his attention fixed on his plate. "Edmund," Amelia finally said, setting down her fork. "About last night. Last night was a mistake." His voice was flat, emotionless. "I apologize for my lapse in judgment. It won't happen again." The word struck her like a slap. "A mistake?" "We have an arrangement, Amelia, a practical understanding. I allowed emotion to cloud that understanding temporarily. It was inappropriate." Inappropriate. Anger flared in her chest, hot and unexpected. "You're my husband. Kissing your wife is hardly inappropriate." Nevertheless, he stood abruptly. "I have work to attend to. Good night." And once again, he left her alone. Amelia sat in the empty dining room, her hands clenched in her lap. She'd been a fool to hope, a fool to think that one kiss could change 7 years of emotional armor, a fool to believe that she might be different from the woman who'd betrayed him. But beneath the hurt and anger, a small flame of defiance burned. She hadn't come this far, hadn't sacrificed her entire future to be treated like a piece of furniture. If Edmund Blackthorne thought he could simply dismiss what had happened between them, he was mistaken. She would give him space, for now. But this conversation was far from over. 3 days passed in tense silence. Edmund avoided her, taking his meals in his study and disappearing on long rides across the estate. Amelia threw herself into household management, working closely with Mrs. MacLeod, to understand every aspect of running Ravenswood Castle. It was during one of these sessions, while reviewing the household accounts in the housekeeper's sitting room, that everything changed. A knock at the door interrupted their work. Morrison, the butler, entered looking uncharacteristically flustered. "Forgive the interruption, Your Grace," he said, addressing Amelia with the title she still wasn't accustomed to hearing. "But there's a gentleman caller. He's asking to see you specifically." Amelia's eyebrows rose. "A caller? Here? Who is it?" Morrison's expression became carefully blank. "Lord Victor Blackthorne, Your Grace, the Duke's cousin." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mrs. MacLeod's face went rigid with disapproval. "Lord Victor is not welcome in this house," the housekeeper said sharply. "His Grace made that quite clear years ago." "I'm aware, Mrs. MacLeod, but Lord Victor insists he has urgent business with Her Grace. He says it concerns her family." Amelia's pulse quickened. "Her family? Where is he? I've put him in the small receiving room." "But Your Grace, I really must advise—" "I'll see him," Amelia decided. Whatever Victor Blackthorne wanted, she needed to know, especially if it truly concerned her father and sister. Mrs. MacLeod stood abruptly. "Then I'm coming with you. That man is not to be trusted." They made their way to the receiving room, Morrison leading the way. Amelia's mind raced. This was the man who had seduced Edmund's first wife. The man who had broken her husband's trust and shattered his ability to love. What could he possibly want with her? The receiving room was small and plainly furnished, clearly chosen by Morrison to show exactly how unwelcome this visitor was. Standing by the window, silhouetted against the grey afternoon light, was a man of medium height with fair hair and handsome features that would have been pleasant if not for the calculating coldness in his blue eyes. Lord Victor Blackthorne turned as she entered, and a smile spread across his face, charming and completely false. "Your Grace," he said, executing an elegant bow. "How delightful to finally meet Edmund's new Duchess. I must say, you're far lovelier than I expected. Lord Victor." Amelia kept her voice cool and formal. "I'm told you have business concerning my family?" Straight to the point. "I appreciate that." Victor's eyes flicked to Mrs. MacLeod, who had positioned herself near the door like a guardian. "Perhaps we might speak privately." "Mrs. MacLeod stays," Amelia said firmly. "Whatever you have to say, you may say in front of her." Victor's smile didn't waver, but something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "As you wish, though I suspect you'll regret that decision." He withdrew a letter from his coat pocket. "I received this from your father 3 days ago. It makes for fascinating reading." Amelia's blood ran cold. "You're in correspondence with my father?" "Oh, yes. We've been writing for quite some time now. Since before your marriage, in fact." Victor held out the letter. "Would you like to read it, or shall I summarize?" With trembling hands, Amelia took the letter. Her father's handwriting was immediately recognizable, the same slightly shaky script that had become more pronounced as his debts had mounted. As she read, the floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "Lord Victor, I write in desperation, the money you advanced me before my daughter's marriage is nearly gone. The creditors you promised to handle are still demanding payment. You assured me that once Amelia was wed to the Duke, our arrangement would be satisfied, but I've received no further funds, and my situation grows more dire by the day. Please, I beg you, send the remaining payment we agreed upon. My younger daughter's future depends on it. I've upheld my part of our bargain. Amelia knows nothing of your involvement. She believes Edmund paid our debts just as you instructed me to tell her. Awaiting your reply, Lord Ashford." The letter slipped from Amelia's fingers. "No," she whispered. "This can't be true." "I'm afraid it is." Victor retrieved the letter from the floor. "Your father's debts were paid by me, not Edmund. As part of a rather clever arrangement, if I do say so myself." Mrs. MacLeod moved closer to Amelia, her face etched with concern. "What arrangement? What have you done?" Victor's smile widened. "I needed someone on the inside of Ravenswood, someone who could observe my dear cousin, document his activities, gain access to his private papers, someone he would trust implicitly." He looked directly at Amelia. "A wife, for instance." The room spun. Amelia gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. "You paid my father to sell me into this marriage. As a spy? Such an ugly word." I prefer to think of it as strategic placement. Victor began to pace, clearly enjoying himself. You see, Edmund holds this estate and fortune only because of primogeniture. As his cousin, I'm next in line should he die without an heir, but he stubbornly refused to cooperate with fate. So I decided to take a more active approach. You're mad, Amelia breathed. I'm practical. Edmund destroyed my life when he discovered my affair with his first wife. He cut me off financially, turned society against me, exiled me from Ravenswood. All because I fell in love with a woman who was wasted on him. Victor's expression hardened. He took everything from me. I simply want what should have been mine in the first place. And what exactly do you expect from me? Amelia demanded, fighting to keep her voice steady. Victor pulled another document from his pocket. This is an affidavit I've prepared. It details several discrepancies in how Edmund manages the estate. Illegal investments, misappropriation of tenant funds, questionable business dealings, all completely fabricated, of course, but with your signature as a witness, it becomes quite convincing. I'll do no such thing. Oh, but you will. Victor's voice turned cold. Because if you don't, I'll go to Edmund with your father's letters. I'll show him proof that you came to Ravenswood as my paid agent, that your entire marriage is based on a conspiracy to destroy him. And we both know what Edmund does to people who betray him, don't we? The threat hung in the air like poison. Amelia's mind raced. If Edmund discovered that she'd been part of Victor's scheme, even unknowingly, it would destroy any chance of trust between them. It would confirm every fear he had about being betrayed again. It would shatter whatever fragile connection they'd begun to build. But signing that affidavit would give Victor the power to strip Edmund of everything. His title, his fortune, his legacy. There must be another way, she said desperately. I'll repay you whatever you gave my father. Just give me time. I don't want money, Your Grace. I want Ravenswood. I want the title that should have been mine. And I want Edmund to finally understand what it feels like to lose everything. Victor's eyes glittered with malice. You have until tomorrow evening to decide. Sign the affidavit or I expose you as my accomplice. Choose wisely. He strode toward the door, then paused. Oh, and one more thing. Don't bother running to Edmund with this conversation. I have copies of all your father's letters. If you tell Edmund anything, I'll simply present them as evidence of your willing participation. After all, you did marry him under false pretenses, didn't you? You let him believe he'd saved your family when it was really me all along. With that, Victor left, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Amelia stood frozen, her entire world crumbling around her. Mrs. MacLeod's hand gripped her arm, steadying her. That devil, the housekeeper hissed, that absolute devil. Your Grace, you must tell his Grace immediately. He needs to know. Tell him what? Amelia's voice cracked. That I married him as part of his cousin's conspiracy? That everything between us has been built on lies? Even if I didn't know about Victor's involvement, Edmund will never believe that. He'll think I was working with Victor all along. But you weren't. You knew nothing of this. Can I prove that? My father took Victor's money. He lied to me about who paid the debts. I came here and married Edmund based on that lie. Even if my ignorance is genuine, how can I ever prove it? Tears burned in Amelia's eyes. Edmund already believes the worst about trust and betrayal. This will only confirm everything he fears. Mrs. MacLeod's expression softened. You care for him, don't you? For his Grace. It doesn't matter what I feel. Amelia wiped roughly at her eyes. I'm trapped. If I tell Edmund the truth, I destroy whatever trust might exist between us. If I don't tell him, I'm complicit in Victor's scheme. And if I sign that affidavit, I betray Edmund in the worst possible way. There must be something we can do. Some way to expose Lord Victor's treachery without proving that I came to Ravenswood under false pretenses. I don't think that's possible. Amelia walked to the window, staring out at the Highlands. Somewhere out there, Edmund was riding his estate, unaware that his new wife had become the unwitting weapon in his cousin's vendetta. I need time to think, she said finally. Please, Mrs. MacLeod, don't tell anyone about this. Not yet, Your Grace, please. I need to find a way to protect Edmund without destroying us both. Just give me until tomorrow. Mrs. MacLeod looked troubled, but finally nodded. Until tomorrow. But Your Grace, that man is dangerous. Whatever you decide, be careful. After the housekeeper left, Amelia remained at the window as afternoon faded into evening. Her mind spun through possibilities, each one bleaker than the last. She could sign the affidavit and save her family, but destroy Edmund. She could refuse and let Victor expose her, destroying Edmund's trust and likely their marriage. She could run, flee Ravenswood and disappear, but that would leave Edmund vulnerable to Victor's schemes and confirm his worst beliefs about women and betrayal. There was no good choice, no path that didn't end in devastation. As darkness fell, Amelia finally left the receiving room and made her way through the castle. She found herself walking toward Edmund's study, the forbidden corridor she'd been warned against entering. She needed to see him, needed to look at his face one more time before everything fell apart. Even if she couldn't tell him the truth, she needed this moment. She raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. What would she say? How could she look into those grey eyes and not confess everything? Before she could decide, the door opened. Edmund stood there, clearly on his way out. He stopped short when he saw her. "Amelia, what are you doing here? I wanted to speak with you." His expression was guarded, but he stepped back. "Come in." The study was everything she'd imagined. Book-lined walls, a massive desk covered with papers and ledgers, a fire burning in the hearth. It smelled of leather and wood smoke and something uniquely Edmund. "Is something wrong?" he asked, studying her face. "Everything," she wanted to say. "Everything is wrong and I don't know how to fix it." But instead she said, "I've been thinking about what you said. About last night being a mistake." Edmund's jaw tightened. "Amelia, no, please, let me finish." She took a breath. "You told me from the beginning that this was a practical arrangement, that you couldn't offer me affection or love. I agreed to those terms. But Edmund, I need you to understand something." "What?" She looked directly into his eyes, memorizing the exact shade of grey, the way the firelight caught in them. "Whatever happens, whatever you come to believe about me, I want you to know that I never meant to hurt you. That's the truth. It's the only truth I can give you right now." Confusion flickered across his face. "What are you talking about? What would I come to believe? I just—" Tears threatened again, and she blinked them back fiercely. "I needed you to know that." Before he could respond, before she could break down completely and confess everything, she turned and fled from the study. She ran through the corridors, her vision blurred with tears until she reached her chambers. Sarah was there, turning down the bed, and she gasped when she saw Amelia's face. "My lady, what's happened?" "Nothing. Everything. I don't know." Amelia sank into a chair, her body shaking. "Sarah, I need to ask you something. If you had to choose between saving someone you cared about and destroying them, which would you choose?" Sarah knelt beside the chair, taking Amelia's hands. "My lady, you're frightening me. What's this about? Just answer, please. I suppose it would depend on what kind of destruction. Sometimes the truth destroys us temporarily, but saves us in the long run. And sometimes—" Sarah squeezed Amelia's hands. "Sometimes love means protecting someone from a truth that would break them, even if it costs us everything. Love." The word hung between them, and Amelia realized with terrible clarity that somewhere between the tower room and the storm, between Edmund's kiss and his subsequent retreat, she had fallen in love with her husband. She loved Edmund Blackthorne, his strength and his wounds, his coldness and the glimpses of warmth beneath it. She loved the man he was and the man he might become if he could learn to trust again, and that love left her with only one choice. She couldn't sign Victor's affidavit. She couldn't destroy the man she loved, no matter the cost to herself. But she also couldn't tell Edmund the truth. Not yet. Not until she found a way to prove her innocence and expose Victor's manipulation, which meant she had less than 24 hours to find evidence that would save them both, or watch everything burn. Amelia barely slept that night. She lay in her bed staring at the canopy above her, her mind racing through every possible solution to the impossible situation Victor had created. By the time pale dawn light began to filter through her windows, she'd made several decisions. First, she needed to see her father's letters, all of them. If she could prove the timeline of Victor's manipulation, show that her father had been coerced or deceived, perhaps she could demonstrate her own innocence. Second, she needed to understand exactly what Victor was planning. The affidavit he'd shown her was clearly just one piece of a larger scheme. And third, she needed to do all of this before tomorrow evening, when Victor expected her answer. She dressed quickly in a simple riding habit and went down to breakfast, hoping to catch Edmund before he disappeared for the day. But once again, his place at the table was empty. His Grace left before sunrise, Mrs. MacLeod informed her, her expression tight with worry. Said he had business in the village. Perfect. That gave Amelia time to act without Edmund's interference. Mrs. MacLeod, I need your help, Amelia said quietly, and I need you to trust me. The housekeeper sat down across from her. I'm listening, Your Grace. Victor said he has copies of my father's letters, which means the originals are somewhere, possibly at his hunting lodge. I need to find them. I need to see exactly what my father wrote and when. You can't be thinking of going to Lord Victor's lodge alone. Not alone. You're going to tell me exactly where it is, and then you're going to provide me with a distraction. Send word to Victor that Edmund wants to meet with him. Somewhere public, the village perhaps. Give me enough time to search his lodge while he's occupied. Mrs. MacLeod's eyes widened. Your Grace, this is dangerous. If Lord Victor catches you, he won't, because you're going to make sure he's miles away when I arrive. Amelia leaned forward. Mrs. MacLeod, I know you've served this family for decades. I know you care about Edmund. If Victor succeeds with whatever he's planning, he'll destroy everything the Blackthornes have built. I can't let that happen. The housekeeper studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. The lodge is 10 miles north near Loch Morven. It's isolated. No servants stay there permanently. Lord Victor visits occasionally, but keeps it locked when he's away. Can you get a message to him? Something that will draw him out? Mrs. MacLeod's expression became thoughtful. Morrison's nephew works at the inn where Lord Victor stays when he's in the village. I could have a message delivered saying that His Grace has reconsidered his position and wishes to discuss a family matter. Lord Victor's arrogance would never let him refuse such an opportunity. How long would that keep him occupied? 2 hours, perhaps 3 if Morrison's nephew can delay him with some pretense about His Grace being late. That will have to be enough. Amelia stood. Send the message now. I'll leave as soon as I know Victor has taken the bait. Within the hour everything was arranged. Morrison's nephew confirmed that Victor had received the message and had departed for the village immediately, clearly eager for what he thought would be a capitulation from Edmund. Amelia ordered a horse saddled and set out before she could second-guess her decision. The ride to Loch Morven took nearly an hour through increasingly rugged terrain. The hunting lodge finally appeared through the mist, a modest stone building perched on a hillside overlooking the dark waters of the loch. It was nowhere near as grand as Ravenswood, but it had a certain grim charm. Amelia dismounted and tied her horse to a tree some distance away. She approached the lodge cautiously, checking the windows for any sign of occupation. The place appeared deserted, just as Mrs. MacLeod had predicted. The front door was locked, but Amelia had spent enough time on her father's decaying estate to know how to pick a simple lock. Using a hairpin and a small knife from her saddlebag, she worked at the mechanism until she heard a satisfying click. The interior of the lodge was dim and musty. Dust covers draped the furniture in the main room. A cold fireplace held the remnants of an old fire. Amelia moved quickly through the space, searching for anything that might serve as Victor's study or office. She found it on the second floor, a small room with a desk, several filing cabinets and shelves lined with ledgers and document boxes. Her heart pounded as she began to search. The first filing cabinet held estate records for the lodge itself, nothing useful. The second contained what appeared to be financial documents, but nothing related to her father. Amelia was beginning to panic, aware that time was slipping away, when she noticed a locked drawer in the desk. She forced it open with the knife, wincing at the splintering sound. Inside was a leather portfolio tied with string. With trembling hands, Amelia opened it. Letters, dozens of them, all in her father's handwriting. She began to read, and with each page, the scope of Victor's manipulation became horrifyingly clear. The first letter was dated nearly a year ago, long before Amelia's marriage had even been proposed. In it, her father wrote desperately about his mounting debts, begging Victor for a loan. Victor's reply, paper-clipped to the letter, was sympathetic and generous. He offered to help, but only if Lord Ashford would agree to certain future considerations. The next letters showed the trap closing. Victor had indeed paid some of the debts, but he'd also arranged for new creditors to appear. Creditors who were, Amelia realized with growing horror, likely in Victor's employ. He'd deliberately made her father's situation worse while positioning himself as the only solution. Then came the proposal. Victor would settle all debts completely, but only if Lord Ashford's eldest daughter married the Duke of Ravenswood. Victor even provided the story Lord Ashford should tell, that Edmund himself had made the offer, that it was a straightforward business arrangement. Her father's responses showed his anguish. He'd questioned the deception, worried about Amelia's future. But Victor had been relentless, painting himself as the hero who was helping the family, while Edmund was portrayed as a cold aristocrat who needed a wife for purely practical reasons. The most damning letter was recent, written just days before Victor's visit to Ravenswood. In it, her father confessed that he'd told Amelia nothing of Victor's involvement, that she genuinely believed Edmund had paid the debts. He begged Victor for the final payment that had been promised, saying that his conscience was tormented by the deception. Victor's reply, scrawled in harsh script, was chilling. "Your conscience is your concern. Our arrangement stands. I'll contact you when I need your daughter to take the next step." Amelia's hands shook as she continued through the portfolio. There were other documents too, drafts of the affidavit Victor had shown her, notes about Edmund's estate management, even a crude timeline of his planned scheme to claim Ravenswood. But the most devastating discovery came in a separate envelope marked insurance. Inside were letters in a different hand, a woman's elegant script. Amelia's breath caught as she recognized the signature, Catherine Blackthorne, Edmund's first wife. The letters were addressed to Victor, written in the months before Catherine's death. They were love letters, passionate and explicit, but they also revealed something else. Catherine had been working with Victor to convince Edmund to make certain financial investments that would have bankrupted the estate. Victor's replies showed him coaching her, telling her exactly how to manipulate her husband. The final letter from Catherine was dated the day before her death. In it, she wrote frantically that Edmund had discovered their affair, that he'd confronted her with evidence of the financial manipulation. She feared what he might do, not to her physically, but to Victor. She ended by saying she planned to confess everything and beg Edmund's forgiveness, and the next day she was dead. Amelia sat back, her mind reeling. Edmund hadn't killed his first wife. Of that she was now certain. But had Victor? Had he pushed Catherine from those battlements to prevent her from exposing their conspiracy? She was still processing this horror when she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. A door opening downstairs, footsteps on the wooden floors. Victor's voice calling out, "I know you're here, Your Grace." Morrison's nephew was quite transparent about his little delaying tactic. "Did you really think I wouldn't see through such an obvious ploy?" Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked around desperately for another way out, but the study had only one door and windows that were too high to jump from safely. She gathered the letters and documents, stuffing them into her riding jacket. If she was caught, at least she'd have the evidence with her. The footsteps were climbing the stairs now. "I must admit I'm impressed by your initiative," Victor continued, his voice growing closer. "Breaking into my lodge, searching my private papers. You're far more resourceful than I gave you credit for, but also far more foolish." He appeared in the doorway, his handsome face twisted with cold fury. His eyes went immediately to the forced drawer, the scattered papers, the evidence of her search. Well, well, the devoted wife, trying to save her beloved husband. How touching. He stepped into the room, blocking her escape. "I assume you've read your father's letters, learned all about how you came to Ravenswood." "I know everything," Amelia said, fighting to keep her voice steady, "including what you and Catherine planned, including the fact that you were using her to bankrupt Edmund." Victor's smile was terrible. "Catherine was useful until she developed a conscience. Much like your father seems to be doing now. It's such an inconvenient affliction. Did you kill her?" The question burst out before Amelia could stop it. "Did you push her from those walls? I didn't need to." Victor's expression was chillingly matter-of-fact. "Catherine's guilt did that all on her own. She went out in that storm to clear her head," she said. "To think about what she'd done. I simply didn't stop her when she climbed the battlements, didn't raise an alarm when she stood too close to the edge, didn't try to save her when she slipped." Horror washed over Amelia. "You watched her die. I watched her make a choice. Just as you're going to make a choice now." He moved closer, and Amelia backed against the desk. You can give me those documents and sign my affidavit. In exchange, I'll tell Edmund that you had nothing to do with my arrangement with your father, that you were an innocent pawn. He might even believe it, given his unfortunate attraction to you. Or I take the documents by force, you refuse to cooperate, and I go to Edmund with proof that you've been my willing accomplice from the start. I'll tell him you came here today to discuss our next move, that you've been playing him for a fool since the moment you arrived at Ravenswood. Victor's eyes glittered with malice. And we both know Edmund will believe it, because deep down, he's been waiting for you to betray him, just like Catherine did. Amelia's mind raced. She couldn't let Victor have this evidence. It was the only proof of her innocence. But she also couldn't fight him physically. He was stronger, and she was trapped in this room. Why are you doing this? She asked, desperately trying to buy time. Edmund is your family. Why destroy him? Because he destroyed me first. Victor's composure cracked, revealing the rage beneath. I loved Catherine. Genuinely loved her. And yes, I wanted Ravenswood. I won't pretend otherwise, but I also wanted her. We could have had everything if Edmund had just been reasonable, if he'd just accepted that she didn't love him and let her go. He was her husband. He was her captor. He brought her to this godforsaken wilderness and expected her to be grateful. She was brilliant and beautiful, and wasted on a man who cared more about his precious honor than her happiness. Victor's hands clenched into fists, and when I tried to free her, when we planned to run away together, Edmund's discovery ruined everything. Catherine panicked. She started talking about confessing, about begging forgiveness. She was going to throw away our entire future out of misplaced guilt. So you let her die. I let her make her own choice. Victor took another step forward. And now I'm giving you the same courtesy. Choose, Your Grace. Your husband's complete destruction or your own reputation. You can't save both. Before Amelia could answer, a new voice cut through the tension like a blade. She doesn't have to choose. Both Amelia and Victor spun toward the door. Edmund stood there, his face a mask of cold fury, and behind him, Mrs. MacLeod and Morrison, along with two men Amelia didn't recognize. Edmund, Victor said, recovering quickly. How convenient. You've saved me a trip. Your wife and I were just discussing. I heard everything. Edmund's voice was deadly quiet. The windows of this lodge are old and poorly sealed. Sound carries remarkably well from the second floor, especially when one is standing directly beneath them. Victor's face went pale. You can't prove anything. It's my word against the written confession you just gave. Edmund gestured to one of the men behind him. Mr. Thornton here is a solicitor from Edinburgh. He's been transcribing every word you've spoken for the past 10 minutes, along with Mrs. MacLeod and Morrison as witnesses. The trap had been sprung, Amelia realized with dizzy relief. But when? How had Edmund known to come here? As if reading her thoughts, Edmund's eyes met hers. Mrs. MacLeod came to me this morning. Told me everything Victor threatened you with yesterday. I've been investigating his claims about your father's debts ever since. He pulled a document from his coat. Your father's actual letters to me, Amelia. The real ones, from before Victor's manipulation. Lord Ashford wrote to me months ago, asking for help with legitimate debts. I agreed to settle them as part of our marriage arrangement. I have the bank records to prove it. But Victor said he paid. Victor paid debts he himself created through proxy creditors, money your father never actually owed. Edmund's expression softened slightly as he looked at her. You were innocent in all of this. I know that. I've known it since Mrs. MacLeod explained what Victor did. Tears streamed down Amelia's face. You believed me, even though I couldn't prove it? I believed in you. Edmund turned back to Victor, his expression hardening again. Unlike my first wife, you've given me no reason to doubt your honor. Unlike this man, you've shown me nothing but honesty and courage. Victor's composure had completely shattered. He looked around wildly, calculating his chances of escape, but Morrison and the other witness had moved to block the doorway. You have a choice, Victor, Edmund said coldly. You can leave Scotland tonight and never return, forfeit any claim to the Blackthorne name or properties, or I can have you arrested for fraud, conspiracy, and accessory to Catherine's death. Your confession just now gives me more than enough evidence you're bluffing. You wouldn't want the scandal. Try me." Edmund's voice was ice. "After what you did to Catherine, after what you tried to do to Amelia, I would relish watching you hang. The only reason I'm offering you exile is because you're still my blood, and I won't completely dishonor the family name. But make no mistake, if you ever come near my wife again, if you ever contact the Ashford family, if you so much as speak my name, I will destroy you utterly. Are we clear?" Victor's shoulders slumped in defeat. "Perfectly clear. Then get out of my sight. You have until dawn to be gone from Scotland." Morrison and the witness escorted Victor from the room. Amelia could hear him stumbling down the stairs, his footsteps retreating into the distance. Then she and Edmund were alone. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. Amelia collapsed against him, all the fear and tension of the past 2 days finally overwhelming her. She sobbed against his chest while he held her, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring quiet reassurances. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I should have told you immediately when Victor came. I should have trusted." "Shh! You were trying to protect me. I understand that now." Edmund pulled back slightly to look at her face. "Mrs. MacLeod explained what Victor threatened, that you thought I'd believe you were complicit in his scheme, that you were willing to sacrifice yourself rather than let him destroy me. I couldn't let him win. I couldn't let him take everything from you. You also couldn't trust me with the truth." There was hurt in his eyes, but also understanding. "And I know why. I've given you no reason to believe I'd listen, no reason to think I wouldn't assume the worst. I've been so focused on protecting myself from betrayal that I've made it impossible for you to trust me." "Edmund, no. It's true, Amelia, and it has to change." He cupped her face in his hands, his grey eyes intense. "When Mrs. MacLeod told me what was happening, my first instinct was exactly what you feared, to believe you'd been working with Victor all along. For about 30 seconds, every defensive wall I'd built told me this was just Catherine all over again." Amelia's heart clenched. "But then I thought about you. Really thought about you." His thumbs brushed away her tears. "I thought about how you worked beside me in the storm without complaint, how you've managed the household with grace, despite my coldness, how you've asked for nothing except basic honesty. And I realized that you're nothing like Catherine, that I've been so terrified of being hurt again that I was destroying my chance at something real." "Something real?" Amelia's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm falling in love with you, Amelia." The words seemed to cost him, but he said them anyway. "I've been fighting it since the night I kissed you, maybe since before that. But watching you ride off to face Victor alone, willing to sacrifice yourself to protect me, it broke something open inside me, something I thought was dead. Oh, Edmund, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I've been cruel and cold and—" She silenced him with a kiss, poured everything she'd been holding back into that connection, all her fear, her relief, her desperate, terrified love for this wounded man who'd finally let down his walls. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I love you," Amelia said. "I think I've loved you since that night in the storm. Maybe before. And it terrified me because I thought you'd never let yourself love me back. I didn't think I could." Edmund rested his forehead against hers. "But you've proven me wrong about so many things. About trust, about second chances, about whether it's possible to heal from betrayal." They stood there for a long moment, holding each other in the dusty study of Victor's lodge, surrounded by the evidence of his schemes. Mrs. MacLeod appeared in the doorway, cleared her throat delicately. "Forgive the interruption, Your Graces, but we should return to Ravenswood. There are still matters to address." Edmund nodded but didn't release Amelia. "You're right. We need to contact Lord Ashford, assure him that his debts truly are settled and that he bears no blame for Victor's manipulation." "And we need to burn those letters," Amelia added, gesturing to Catherine's correspondence. "Whatever she did, she deserves to rest in peace now." "Agreed." Edmund finally stepped back, though he kept hold of her hand. "No more secrets, Amelia. No more walls between us. Can you agree to that?" "Yes." "No more secrets." They rode back to Ravenswood together as the sun began to set, painting the Highlands in shades of gold and amber. Amelia felt lighter than she had in weeks, despite everything that had happened. The threat was gone. The truth was known. And Edmund, impossible wounded Edmund, loved her. But as they crested the final hill and Ravenswood Castle came into view, dark against the evening sky, Amelia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. Because in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered that the cost of their happiness might still come due. That Victor's exile wouldn't be the end of this story. That sometimes love wasn't enough to overcome the wounds of the past. She tightened her grip on Edmund's hand and pushed the thought away. They had this moment. They had each other. For now, that would have to be enough. But fate, as Amelia would soon discover, rarely granted happy endings to those who'd been touched by tragedy. And Ravenswood Castle kept its secrets close. The weeks following Victor's exile should have been the happiest of Amelia's life. Edmund transformed before her eyes. The cold, distant man she'd married gradually gave way to someone warmer, more open. He smiled more often. He sought her company rather than avoiding it. He talked with her late into the night about everything from estate management to philosophy to the future they might build together. Their marriage was finally consummated on a crisp October evening, and it was nothing like the cold transaction Amelia had once feared. Edmund was tender and patient, and afterward, as they lay tangled together in his bed, he whispered against her hair that he'd never imagined he could feel this way again. "I thought that part of me was dead," he said. "But you brought me back to life, Amelia." She should have been purely happy, but a shadow lingered at the edges of her joy, a sense of something unfinished, some price yet to be paid. The first warning came in early November, in the form of a letter from her father. "Dearest Amelia, I write with news both joyful and troubling. Your sister Margaret has received a proposal of marriage from a respectable gentleman, a union that would secure her future admirably. However, the gentleman's family has raised questions about our own family's reputation. Specifically, they've heard rumours about my dealings with Lord Victor Blackthorne. I assured them the matter was resolved, but they demand proof that I was an innocent victim of his schemes rather than a willing participant. Without such proof, they will withdraw the offer, and Margaret's reputation will be tarnished by association with scandal. I know I have no right to ask anything more of you after the deception that brought you to Ravenswood, but if there is any way you might obtain documentation proving Victor's manipulation, perhaps from the Duke's own investigation, it would save your sister from paying for my mistakes. Your devoted father Amelia read the letter 3 times, her heart sinking. She knew exactly what her father needed. The evidence they'd gathered from Victor's lodge, the letters, the financial records, the proof of his systematic manipulation. But there was a problem. A terrible, insurmountable problem. To provide that evidence publicly would mean revealing the full scope of Victor's scheme, including his affair with Catherine, including his role in her death, including the financial conspiracy that Catherine had been part of before her demise, and that revelation would destroy Edmund. She found him in the library that evening, reading by the fire. He looked up as she entered, and his face immediately brightened, an expression that still made her heart skip. "There you are. I was beginning to think you'd gotten lost in those endless corridors." He set aside his book. "Come sit with me." Amelia settled beside him on the sofa, and Edmund immediately pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. This casual affection, so freely given now, still felt miraculous. "You're troubled," he said, studying her face. "What's wrong?" She handed him the letter without speaking. Edmund read it, his expression growing progressively darker. When he finished, he set it aside carefully. "Your father wants the evidence against Victor, to clear his name, to protect Margaret." "I see." Edmund was quiet for a long moment. "And you're wondering if we should provide it." "Edmund, if we make that evidence public, the letters between Victor and Catherine, the financial conspiracy, everything, it will destroy your family's reputation. Everyone will know that your first wife was planning to bankrupt you, that she died under suspicious circumstances, that Victor may have been involved in her death, all of which is true. But it will hurt you." Amelia turned to face him fully. "The scandal would be enormous. People would gossip about you, about Catherine, about what really happened that night. I can't ask you to endure that for my sister's sake." Edmund's hand came up to cup her cheek. "Amelia, your sister's entire future is at stake. Of course we'll provide the evidence. But no. His voice was firm but gentle. I won't let Margaret suffer because of Victor's actions or my own pride. If exposing the truth about Catherine means enduring some gossip, then so be it. My reputation can withstand scandal. Your sister's cannot. Amelia felt tears prick her eyes. You would do that? Publicly acknowledge what Catherine did? Let everyone know how she betrayed you? I've spent 7 years hiding from the truth, Amelia, locking myself away rather than face what happened. But you've taught me that healing doesn't come from hiding. It comes from confronting the past honestly. He kissed her forehead. Besides, the truth will come out eventually. Victor won't stay silent forever, no matter what threats I made. Better to control the narrative ourselves. Are you certain? I'm certain that I love you. And that means loving your family too. Even the sister I've never met and the father whose poor judgment brought you to me in the first place. He smiled slightly. Strange how Victor's scheming gave me the greatest gift of my life, isn't it? They spent that evening drafting a careful letter to Lord Ashford, explaining what evidence they could provide and how it should be presented. Edmund's solicitor would prepare an official statement documenting Victor's manipulation, clearing Lord Ashford of any willing participation in the scheme. It should have been the end of the matter. But 3 days later, Mrs. MacLeod brought Amelia news that made her blood run cold. Your Grace, there's been word from the village. Lord Victor was seen near the border, heading back towards Scotland, not away from it. Amelia found Edmund in his study immediately. Mrs. MacLeod says Victor's coming back. Edmund's expression hardened. I was afraid of this. Men like Victor don't accept defeat gracefully. He stood, moving to the window. I've had men watching the road since he left. If he comes within 10 miles of Ravenswood, I'll know. What if he's planning something? What if he means to hurt you, or worse? Then I'll be ready. Edmund turned back to her, his face grim. But Amelia, I need you to promise me something. If Victor does come here, if there's any confrontation, you stay away from it. Let me handle him. Edmund, please. I can't risk him using you against me. Promise me you'll stay safe. Reluctantly, Amelia promised, but the sense of dread that had been haunting her intensified. The storm broke 4 days later. It was Morrison who brought the news, bursting into the breakfast room where Amelia and Edmund sat. Your Grace. Lord Victor's been spotted on the estate. He's riding toward the castle now, and he's not alone. There are 3 men with him, rough-looking types. Edmund was on his feet immediately. How far? 20 minutes, perhaps less. Get the servants inside and lock the doors. Send someone to the village for the magistrate. Edmund turned to Amelia. Go to your chambers. Lock yourself in. Don't come out until I come for you. No, I'm not leaving you to face him alone. Amelia, please. The desperation in his voice stopped her. I can't think clearly if I'm worried about your safety. Please, just this once, let me protect you. She wanted to argue. Every instinct told her to stay by his side, but the look in his eyes, the terrible fear that she might be hurt, made her relent. Come back to me, she whispered, gripping his hand. Always. He kissed her, hard and desperate. I love you. I love you too. Then he was gone, striding toward the front of the castle with Morrison at his heels. Amelia stood frozen for a moment before Sarah appeared, pulling her toward the stairs. Come, my lady, quickly. They'd barely reached Amelia's chambers when they heard the commotion below. Horses in the courtyard, men's voices raised in anger, the heavy boom of someone pounding on the castle's main door. Amelia ran to the window. Below, she could see Victor on horseback, flanked by 3 rough-looking men, just as Morrison had described. Victor was shouting something, but the wind carried his words away. Then Edmund appeared in the courtyard, alone and unarmed. Amelia's heart seized. She couldn't hear what was being said, but she could see Victor gesturing wildly, clearly agitated. One of his companions had a pistol visible in his belt. The confrontation grew more heated, the men closing in around Edmund. My lady, step back from the window, Sarah urged. You shouldn't watch this. But Amelia couldn't look away. She pressed her hand against the cold glass, willing Edmund to be safe, to walk away from this confrontation. Then everything happened at once. Victor pulled something from his coat, a pistol of his own. He aimed it directly at Edmund, still shouting. Edmund held up his hands, trying to calm the situation. But Victor was beyond reason. his face twisted with rage and desperation. The shot rang out like thunder. Amelia screamed, but the sound was lost in the chaos below. Edmund staggered backward, his hand going to his shoulder, where blood had begun to bloom across his white shirt. No, Amelia was running before she could think, wrenching open her chamber door and flying down the stairs. Sarah called after her, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. By the time she reached the courtyard, Morrison and several other servants had restrained Victor and his men. The magistrate's men were arriving from the village. But Amelia's eyes were only for Edmund, who had collapsed against the courtyard wall, his face pale with shock and pain. She dropped to her knees beside him. "Edmund, oh God, Edmund, I told you to stay in your chambers," he said weakly, but there was a ghost of a smile on his lips. "You never do follow orders, do you? Don't talk. Save your strength." Amelia pressed her hands against the wound, trying to staunch the bleeding. It was high on his shoulder, hopefully not fatal, but there was so much blood. "Someone get the doctor. Now!" Mrs. MacLeod appeared with clean linens, helping Amelia bind the wound. Edmund's eyes were starting to glaze with pain and shock. "Victor," he managed. "He said he'd rather see me dead than happy. Said if he couldn't have Ravenswood, no one would." "Hush. Don't think about him. The magistrate has him now. He'll hang for this." "Amelia." Edmund's hand found hers, his grip weak but urgent. "Listen to me. If something happens, nothing's going to happen. If it does, the estate goes to you. Everything. I changed my will weeks ago. You'll be protected, you and your family. Stop it." Tears streamed down her face. "You're not dying. I won't let you die. We just found each other, Edmund. We just started to be happy. You can't leave me now." His eyes softened with terrible understanding. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, Amelia. I wanted more time with you. Wanted to give you everything you deserved, then stay with me. Fight. Please, Edmund, please don't leave me." The doctor arrived, pushing Amelia gently aside to examine the wound. She watched in terrified silence as he worked, probing the injury, assessing the damage. Finally, he looked up at Mrs. MacLeod. "Get him inside. We need to remove the bullet immediately. He's losing too much blood." They carried Edmund into the castle and up to his chambers. Amelia followed, refusing to be separated from him despite the doctor's protests. She held Edmund's hand as the doctor worked, feeling him squeeze her fingers during the worst of the pain, watching his face grow progressively paler. The surgery seemed to take hours. When the doctor finally extracted the bullet and stitched the wound, Edmund had lost consciousness. "Will he live?" Amelia whispered. The doctor's expression was grave. The bullet missed his heart and lungs. "But he's lost a great deal of blood, and there's always risk of infection. The next few days will tell." He began packing his instruments. "Keep him warm. Give him water when he wakes. And pray, Your Grace. Pray hard." Amelia didn't leave Edmund's side for 3 days. She sat beside his bed, holding his hand, wiping the fever sweat from his brow, talking to him even though he couldn't hear. She told him about the future they would have together, the children they might raise, the years of happiness that awaited them if he would just fight to stay alive. But on the 3rd day, as dawn broke grey and cold over the Highlands, Edmund's condition worsened. The fever that had been manageable spiked dangerously. His breathing became laboured. The doctor, summoned again, examined him with growing concern. "The wound is infected," he said quietly. "I've seen this before. The fever will continue to rise. At this point, all we can do is keep him comfortable and hope his constitution is strong enough to fight through it. There must be something more." Amelia's voice broke. "Some treatment, some medicine. I'm sorry, Your Grace. It's in God's hands now." She sent the doctor away and returned to Edmund's side. He was delirious with fever, sometimes calling out for Catherine, sometimes for Amelia, sometimes shouting warnings about Victor. She cooled his burning skin with damp cloths and whispered reassurances he couldn't hear. As the day wore into evening, Edmund suddenly opened his eyes. They were clearer than they'd been in days, and Amelia's heart leaped with hope. "Amelia," he whispered. "I'm here. I'm right here. I can't see you properly. Everything's dark." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Save your strength, don't try to talk, no. I need to tell you. He struggled to breathe, each word costing him. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. The only good thing to come from all of Victor's scheming. I was dead inside before you came. You brought me back to life. And you brought me hope, Amelia sobbed. You showed me what real love could be. Please, Edmund, please don't leave me. I don't know how to live without you now. You'll find a way. You're stronger than you know. His hand tightened weakly on hers. Promise me. Promise you'll leave this place. Ravenswood has too many ghosts. Too much sadness. Take the inheritance and go somewhere bright and warm. Somewhere without shadows, I can't promise that. This is our home, our life together. Our life together was beautiful, but it was too short. His breathing was becoming more labored. I'm sorry, my love. I'm so sorry I couldn't give you more time. Couldn't give you the years you deserved. The time we had was enough, Amelia lied, because she couldn't bear to add to his distress. You gave me everything, Edmund. You taught me about courage and healing and love. You were enough. You were more than enough. He smiled. That rare, beautiful smile that transformed his whole face. Liar. Sweet, loving liar. His eyes were starting to lose focus. Thank you, Amelia, for choosing me, for saving me, even if only for a little while. Edmund, no, stay with me. Please. But his eyes were closing. His breathing was slowing. And Amelia felt the exact moment when his hand went slack in hers, when his chest stopped rising and falling, when the man she loved slipped away into darkness. No, she whispered. Then louder, no. Edmund, Edmund, come back, please, come back to me. But there was no answer, only the terrible, suffocating silence of death. Mrs. MacLeod found her hours later, still sitting beside Edmund's body, still holding his hand, tears streaming silently down her face. Your Grace, the housekeeper said gently, we need to prepare him. We need to... I know. Amelia's voice was hollow. I know what needs to be done. She leaned down and pressed one final kiss to Edmund's forehead, cold now beneath her lips. I love you, she whispered. I will always love you, and I promise I won't let your sacrifice be for nothing. The funeral was held on a grey November morning that perfectly matched Amelia's devastation. The castle chapel that had witnessed their wedding now bore witness to her widowhood. The servants gathered to pay their respects, their faces etched with genuine grief. Edmund had been a good master, and they'd seen how happy he'd become in his final weeks. Victor, of course, was absent, arrested for attempted murder and awaiting trial. He would hang, the magistrate assured her. But what comfort was that? Edmund was still gone. As they lowered the casket into the Blackthorne family crypt, Amelia stood dry-eyed and numb. She'd cried all her tears over the past 4 days. Now there was only emptiness. Her father arrived the day after the funeral, filled with remorse and grief. Margaret came too, the sister Amelia had sacrificed so much to protect. I'm so sorry, Lord Ashford said, embracing his daughter. If I had never taken Victor's money, if I had been stronger. It's not your fault, Amelia said mechanically. Victor manipulated all of us. You, me, Catherine, even Edmund. He's the only one to blame. But privately, she wondered, if she'd told Edmund about Victor's threats immediately, instead of trying to handle it herself, would he have avoided that confrontation? Would he still be alive? The guilt was a constant companion as heavy as her grief. Margaret stayed at Ravenswood for 2 weeks, trying to comfort her sister. But Amelia could barely speak, barely eat, barely function. She wandered the castle like a ghost, visiting all the places where she and Edmund had shared moments of happiness. The tower room where he'd apologized, the library where he'd told her he was falling in love, the battlements where he'd first revealed his wounds. She stood on those battlements one evening, looking down at the rocks far below where Catherine had died. She understood now, in a way she never had before, the terrible appeal of simply stepping off, of ending the pain that felt like it would never stop. But she'd made Edmund a promise, and even in death she wouldn't break it. 3 months after Edmund's death, Amelia finally made her decision. She called Mrs. MacLeod to the study, Edmund's study, which still smelled like him, still held his books and papers and the echo of his presence. "I'm leaving Ravenswood," she said. "Edmund wanted me to. He told me to find somewhere bright and warm, somewhere without shadows." Mrs. MacLeod's eyes filled with tears. "Where will you go? Italy, perhaps, or the south of France. Somewhere I can breathe without feeling like I'm drowning in ghosts." Amelia looked around the study one last time. "But I won't sell the estate. I want you and Morrison and all the staff to stay on. Keep it maintained. Perhaps someday." She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Perhaps someday it would hurt less. Perhaps someday she could return without feeling like her heart was being ripped from her chest. But she doubted it. Before she left, Amelia visited the family crypt one final time. She knelt beside Edmund's tomb, her hand pressed against the cold stone. "I kept my promise," she whispered. "I'm leaving. I'm going to try to find a life without you, even though I don't know how. Even though part of me died with you." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "But I want you to know those few months we had together were the happiest of my life. You taught me what love really meant, what sacrifice and courage and trust could build between two broken people." She traced his name carved in the stone: Edmund Alexander Blackthorne, Duke of Ravenswood, beloved husband. "I was yours for such a short time," she continued, "but I'll be yours forever. No matter where I go, no matter how many years pass, you'll always have my heart, because you were the only man who ever truly saw me, who ever truly loved me, and I will carry that love with me until the day I die." The stone offered no comfort, no response, just cold silence. Amelia stood slowly, her hand lingering on the tomb. Then she turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing through the crypt like a final goodbye. 5 years later, a visitor came to Ravenswood Castle. Mrs. MacLeod, now considerably older and greyer, welcomed the elegantly dressed woman who arrived in a fine carriage. The woman wore black, not the deep mourning black of fresh grief, but a softer shade that spoke of old sorrow, carried with dignity. "Mrs. MacLeod," the woman said. "You remember me?" "Your Grace." The housekeeper's eyes widened. "Of course I remember you. We all thought, we wondered if you'd ever return. I wasn't sure I could." Amelia, for it was indeed she, though changed by the years, looked up at the castle. "But I found I couldn't stay away forever. This place still holds half my heart." She spent 3 days at Ravenswood, walking the halls, visiting the places she and Edmund had shared, the tower room, the library, the battlements where they'd first begun to lower their walls. On the final evening, she stood in the courtyard where Edmund had been shot. The stones had long since been cleaned, but she could still see it, his blood, his pain, his sacrifice. "I tried to move on," she said aloud, though only the wind could hear her. "I travelled, I met other people. I even let someone court me once, thinking perhaps I could learn to love again. But I couldn't. Because you're still here." She pressed her hand to her heart. "You're still here, and no one else could ever fill that space." The wind carried no answer, but Amelia didn't need one. She knew the truth now, had always known it. Some loves are too profound to survive. Some connections burn too bright to last. She and Edmund had been given a gift, a brief shining moment of perfect understanding and love. But the price of that gift had been everything. As she prepared to leave Ravenswood the next morning, Mrs. MacLeod pressed something into her hand. "I found this in His Grace's study," the housekeeper said. "After he died, I think he meant it for you." It was a letter, sealed with Edmund's ring. Amelia waited until she was in her carriage, leaving Ravenswood behind once more before she opened it. "My dearest Amelia, if you're reading this, then I am gone and you are grieving. I'm sorry for that, sorrier than words can express. I never meant to leave you. I never meant for our story to end so soon, too. But I need you to know that even if we only had weeks or months together, they were worth everything. You gave me back my humanity. You taught me to trust again. You showed me that love, real love, is worth any risk. Don't waste your life mourning me, my darling. Live, be happy, find joy wherever you can. Because the greatest gift you can give me now is to take everything I taught you about love and courage and use it to build a beautiful life. I will love you always, even from beyond death, and I will wait for you, however long it takes, until we can be together again in whatever comes after this life. Forever yours." Edmund Amelia folded the letter carefully, her vision blurred with tears. She tucked it close to her heart as the carriage carried her away from Ravenswood, away from the Highlands, away from the place where she'd learned both the heights of love and the depths of loss. She would honor Edmund's request. She would try to live, to find moments of happiness in the years that remained to her, but she would never love again. Because true love, the kind that changes you at your very core, comes only once in a lifetime. And Amelia had already had hers. What did you think of this tragic love story? Could Amelia and Edmund's love have survived if fate had been kinder? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please subscribe to the channel for more tales of love, sacrifice, and the cruel hand of destiny. And if you believe in love that transcends even death, leave a like to honor Edmund and Amelia's memory. Thank you for listening to this heartbreaking journey through the Scottish Highlands. Until next time, may your own love story have a happier ending than theirs. Remember, some loves burn so bright, they cannot help but consume everything, including themselves.